In 2015, I was living with my then boyfriend. I was 18 at the time, living in a very sketchy apartment building in a not so good neighborhood. When I say sketchy, I mean crack house type sketchy. You'd find anything from alcoholics, severely mentally ill people to drug dealers and addicts living in these apartments, and the police were called to the property a few times a week. They even drove by just to check for safety reasons. There was an incident once during the night. One of the neighbors knocked on a door and my boyfriend went to open it up while I was asleep. One of the neighbors, an addict who happened to be severely schizophrenic, was at the door, and he barged into the apartment and threatened my boyfriend. Fortunately, he managed to calm him down and got him out of the apartment. For reasons like this, we brought a live security camera that we installed at our door and also connected to our TV so that we could easily check who was there. Everything was fine for a few weeks, until this one night. My boyfriend's best friend was sleeping over this weekend. We were all sleeping. I guess it was around 3 to 4 a.m. at the time when I woke up to someone ringing the doorbell. The camera was connected to the TV, but there was also a small screen attached to the door that I could activate to see who was outside. Since everyone was sleeping in the living room, I walked into the hallway to check on the small screen instead of turning on the TV. When I pressed the button, I saw two guys wearing hoodies looking at the camera. I paused for a second because I didn't fully understand what was going on. Not until they looked at each other, nodded, and then one of the guys reached his hand towards the camera and ripped it out, making the screen go black. I stood there for about 5 seconds before I realized what had happened. I ran back to the living room and shook my boyfriend awake, almost yelling, while also whispering, "Quick, get up! Someone just stole your camera!" He darted up and ran outside, didn't even bother putting on a shirt or shoes. All the noise woke up his buddy. Naturally, according to him, later on, he saw a guy running away into a wooded area, so he chased after him. What he didn't know was that I saw two guys and not just one. Well, I think the guy who ran away was just the distraction, because about a minute after he ran out, I heard someone entering the hallway. I froze in absolute terror. My buddy noticed that and sprinted to the door, separating the hallway of the living room, and the conversation went something along the lines of, "Oh, is Jason here?" "No, he isn't." "Oh, could I come inside and sit for a minute?" "I don't think that would be appropriate since he isn't here." "Oh, but I could go in and wait for him until he gets back." "That's a no. Please leave." "Just for a minute?" "No, leave." He left. Buddy came in with a shocked but also frightened expression on his face. Both of us were in awe about what happened. My boyfriend came back 5 minutes later and told us about the unsuccessful chase. Both me and my buddy were terrified as he started telling us what happened while he was outside. My boyfriend said he only saw one guy outside when he had the time to process the situation. My theories were A, they stole their camera as a distraction so my boyfriend would chase him while guy number 2 raided the apartment while he was out, or B, they knew I was there, but the buddy was not, and they stole the camera to lure him out so the others would walk in and either rob the place, assault me, or both. Both of these options are likely, the first one more than the other. The reason I also suspect the second theory is because most of the neighbors knew that I lived there with him. Many of them had seen me leaving and entering the apartment, and many of them occasionally said hi to me in passing, so most of the neighbors knew about me as well. I'm only 5 foot, quite small and an easy target. Fortunately, I'll never know what could have happened that night. I don't know how that night would have gone down if my boyfriend's best friend hadn't been there. If I wasn't a target to begin with, I definitely would have been one if that guy walked in and saw me alone. I think whatever guardian angel placed Buddy there that night. Everyone I've told this story to told me that I'm being paranoid, and probably wouldn't have gotten hurt, but I don't believe them. They weren't in that situation. Nobody plans for a break-in without malicious intent to begin with, so I don't doubt for a second that I wouldn't have been caught in the middle of it had we been alone. I babysat for a single mum down the road. She was going out with her new boyfriend. Cute, great 5-year-old boy, very timid though, and I myself was 15 at the time. Night's going fine, and we decide to do some arts and crafts. He gets up and runs over to grab some scissors and runs back, and I say, "Hold up, slow down. You shouldn't run with those, it's bad and dangerous." He instantly drops the scissors and starts sobbing, turns around, and defeatedly heads towards the kitchen. I'm completely baffled and follow him to the kitchen, and say I'm confused and ask what's going on. He points to a drawer, and through sobs over 20 seconds he manages to struggle out, "It's a silverware drawer," but prominent on the top is a large knife, which I can see has specks of blood on it. I turn around to him, and he's taken his pants off. On his legs, I see countless cuts, some scars looking years old, some only a day or two old. So I'm in a weird mix of confusion, pity, fear, and sadness. He had been cut as a punishment for any little thing he ever did wrong. I close the drawer, kneel down and tell him I'm sorry, and I would never hurt him, and to put his pants back on. It takes me maybe 20 minutes for me to console him to stop crying and calm down, and believe that I'm not going to harm him, and that this isn't a test. I get some treats for us, let him choose a TV show, and sit him down on the couch. I say I need to make a quick call, but I'll be right around the corner and back ASAP. He agrees, and I call the cops. Non-emergency though, so it'll be a while. I let them know he's still very shaky and I'd like to hang up and just go be with him. I hang up, but before I do I decide to deadbolt all the doors just in case. Luckily for me, too, because the mum gets home before the cops, I give the kid my Discman and headphones and send him upstairs so he can't hear any of the ensuing unpleasantries. I go to the door and tell her she's not getting in until the cops arrive. She freaks out, screaming at me and pounding on the door, yelling to be let in, ordering the kid to let her in or it'll happen. She goes around the door and tries them as well. Just as she grabs a brick and approaches the window, the cops pull in. She drops the brick and goes to them in hysterics, claiming I've threatened to hurt her boy and I'm doing terrible things. I open the door and approach. The cops yell at me to stay where I am, and one of them runs up to me and grabs hold. I do not resist and explain the situation. Halfway through, Mummy screams at me, "Liar! You did it! You monster! You hurt my boy!" The other cop manages to stop her screaming at me, and I convince my cop to step further away so that I can finish. Cops converse and tell me I'm going to be cuffed and put in the cruiser until medical services get there to inspect the child. I successfully argue that mum and son should not be alone together. The mum is belligerent. "You have the culprit all cuffed. You can go and throw the book at that monster while you're still here the entire wait." Medical gets there, inspects the boy, and I'm released with apologies, and the mom takes my place in the cruiser. All that, and I didn't even get paid. I saw her packing to move a few weeks later, so I guess she didn't get charged. Never saw the kid again, but I hope he was able to go to a better person, maybe other family members or his dad. The dad always seemed like a great guy, but he hadn't been around for a few years since shortly after the breakup. Looking back, I have to wonder if she might have framed him for her abuse to get custody. I didn't get much follow-up because in early teens, no one wants to share any grisly details with me, and to be fair, I probably wouldn't have wanted them. I live with 3 other guys in a duplex. What happened was around Christmas time, and our living community consists of a mix of college kids and families. One evening, my girlfriend and I arrived at the vacant house around 8 p.m. All the lights were off, which was normal, and upon entering we smelled the welcoming scent of freshly baked cookies. Turning on the kitchen light, we felt the heat of the oven radiate through the chilly home, and oddly enough, there were no cookies. There were a couple of Tupperware containers pulled out from the cabinet, but no cookies in them. Slightly stranger, 8x8 brownie containers were found in the sink, and there was a spatula covered in cookie dough, chocolate chip to be precise. Who bakes cookies in those square containers? One by one, my roommate came back to the house. Will, Jack, Brian. Jack claims to not have baked any cookies, as well as Will. Brian is known to bake all the time, so we waited for him to return. Lo and behold, he comes back and swears he hadn't baked anything. We all looked at each other in confusion and dismay. Who would come into a college kid's house and do such a thing? And might I add, no belongings were stolen. Our 51-inch TV was still there along with all the gaming consoles and music equipment, clothes and laptop. Upon further investigation, we concluded the house was completely empty for a total of roughly 4 hours, and there was in fact cookie residue on both the spatula and the Tupperware. The trash cans inside and outside the house had no evidence of any cookie business going down. Whatever happened to me and my roommates is truly incredibly unexplainable. 30 years ago, I'm 14, and me and an older friend are babysitting for a 6-year-old girl and her younger brother. We've been told that sometimes the girl complains about seeing a ghost man in her bedroom and upstairs at night, and that he comes out through the attic door. Now, I didn't believe a word of it. Kids are weird and they say weird things. We get the kids ready for bed, but they wouldn't settle. This girl said she felt scared, and her little brother started crying. She asked if she could sleep in her mum's bed until she got home. The little brother wanted to go with her, so I tucked them in and told some silly stories and laughed till they were both tired. Both kids were virtually asleep when we left the door ajar and the hall light on. An hour later we were sitting downstairs watching The Equalizer, and all was good. The kids were definitely asleep, as I had to sneak past their room to use the bathroom. I had a quick peek on my way back. The little brother was snoring gently, but other than that, everything else was quiet. Back downstairs to watch a bit more TV. 20 minutes go by and out of nowhere we hear heavy banging. Very heavy. The kids are screaming immediately, and I run upstairs to meet the kids as they're running out of their rooms. The banging continues. I have eyes on the kids, so I know it's not them making the noise. The kids fly at me. I grab the little brother and we rush down the stairs, run into the front room, shut the door, and all crash on the sofa. Everything is silent apart from the TV, which I switch off. We sat in silence for about 5 minutes holding each other, and after a few minutes the girl, with tears in her eyes, just says in a matter of fact, the man was angry because she wasn't in her own room. So we tried to push over a wardrobe, then he started thumping the wall. That event has stayed with me all these years. Once when I was really young, like one of my earliest memories, me and my 2 older brothers and my oldest sister were home alone while my parents were out. This is Baltimore City, and late at night, and suddenly there's a knock on the door. We ignore it, like we're supposed to. Then it's a banging, and a man's voice yells, "I know you're in there, let me in." We freak out, my sister grabs a knife, and yells for him to go away. "I'm your Uncle John, let me in." "We don't have an Uncle John. I'm your dad's brother." "My dad doesn't have a brother?" He doesn't know about me, let me in." By this time we've called the cops and are huddled under a table, sister with knife in hand. Cops show up and arrest him on sight. Parents come home freaking out, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is how we learnt about my dad's long-lost brother who lives in Virginia. The only way I can think this dude didn't know that this was creepy as hell was that he was from the country and maybe didn't think showing up unannounced to meet lost kin was weird, but to some kids from Baltimore, we're terrified. It started when I went on vacation for a few days about a year ago in November. I came back, and the back door that leads into the stairs to the basement was unlocked. I had a roommate called Alex, who didn't come very often because she practically lived with her girlfriend, and I assumed that she had just forgotten to lock the door. We mostly use this door because it's closer to the side of the house that we park on. I let the dogs outside and then make sure to lock the door and go to bed. 3 a.m. hits, and the dogs wake up and start pacing like they're nervous and are acting weird. I calm them down and go back to sleep. Then they go insane at around 4, and I decide to let them out. I go to the back door, and the door is slightly open. I freak out and call Alex. She's let friends crash in the basement before, but she usually says something, and says that she hasn't had anyone over. I decide at this point it's probably best to have a weapon for protection. I check out the basement, grab a bat as well, and make sure one of the dogs comes with me. I turn on the lights and notice that there's a blanket that we keep on the back of a couch laying on the floor, and the throw pillows are both on one end and have an indenting where it looks like someone had been laying. I hear the laundry room, and I see the washer and dryer have both been used. There were clothes that were in the dryer now on top of it, and the laundry detergent bottle was also opened. As I'm heading back upstairs, I notice that the spare keys that we kept by the back door are gone. I call Alex to tell her what I found, and she decides to come over. She checks out her stuff and finds nothing missing, so she opts to just change the locks, as she owns the house, so she can do this. A week or so passes, and as I'm waking up to what sounds like creaking coming from the attic, I think nothing of it, and just get up and start my night, as I'm a night shift worker. As I'm leaving, I happen to notice that the cover on the whole of the attic looked a bit crooked. I freaked out. I messaged Alex and told her what happened, and she said she will look into it when she gets back from work herself. While I'm at work, I get a text from Alex letting me know she didn't find anything off, and I'm probably still just paranoid from the other night. She says that since the locks were all changed, there's no way someone could have gotten in without breaking something. I ended up moving out after a year. She was having her girlfriend move in with her, and I was tired of being in that house. It became a regular thing that the door would be unlocked, and I always heard sounds coming from up above. I would occasionally notice that the cover to the attic had been moved as well. I also regularly found things would move around in the basement, and I never went down there without a dog with me. It took a few months in the new place to be able to sleep soundly again. I never heard anything from Alex since. However, I was asked to come over to let the dogs out while she was out of town one time, and the door was unlocked when I got there. She texted me that day complaining that I didn't know how to lock the door, and I told her that I locked it, but she insisted that I was pranking her. That's all I know. Years ago, I was planning on taking my girlfriend to Montreal for our anniversary. I mentioned it to my friend Fred, who said, "Man, you have to try this restaurant called Au Noir. It's one of those places where you eat in total darkness and all the waiters are blind." I thought it sounded neat, so we decided to go. We didn't bother to make reservations, we just picked a random day and called before we left the hotel to make sure there was room for us. The place was pretty cool. You put all your valuables in a locker, then your blind waiter leads you and your party to a conga line in a table. The place is so dark you can't see your hands in front of your face. I don't think I've ever been anywhere as dark as that. The food was decent, and it was fun experiencing eating sloppily in a crowded restaurant. My girlfriend and I made out a bit just for the thrill of it, doing it so publicly without being noticed. In the middle of the meal, I started hearing a familiar voice out in the restaurant. It sounded exactly like Fred. I told my girlfriend, but she said I was crazy. So I shouted into the total darkness, "Hey Fred!" The voice stopped talking, but there was no response. After a moment I heard the voice again, so I shouted, "Hey, Fred Parker!" Out of the darkness I heard him reply, "Did someone say my name?" My mind was blown. Even though Fred didn't know when my anniversary was, even though he picked a random day and time to have dinner, even though all three of us lived in a different city from the restaurant, we all managed to show up there for a meal at the exact same time. The funniest thing about it was that we wouldn't go over to join him because we had no idea where he was. We arranged to meet at the coffee shop across the street once we were done with our meals. Weird glitch, massive coincidence, intentional troll from Fred? Take your pick. I'm a nanny for 2 young boys, both are 14 months old. I've been working with them for less than a month, but creepy things keep happening. When I'm playing with them downstairs, I often hear distinct footsteps coming from the upstairs, despite nobody being in the house besides us. I also constantly feel like things move by themselves when they are clearly just out of reach from the boys. I've brushed it off as my imagination until just now. It's nap time and I've been hearing the footsteps again, but I've been ignoring them because I can't figure out if it's just the sounds of the house or not. But then from down the hall I hear a large ball bouncing. It sounds like the exercise ball that's in the room of one of the boys. I immediately went over to the video camera and looked at it, and it shows him very clearly asleep, but I can't see the ball from where the camera is. I immediately ran over to the room and peeked in. The ball was rolling around a tiny bit with no clear reason as to how. All the windows were closed, and the ball is on the ground. It could have only made that sound if a grown adult picked it up and dropped it. I could maybe attribute the rolling to wind that perhaps somehow moved it as I opened the door, but the ball sound. What? Am I crazy? Last night was very unusual. My girlfriend and I got into a pretty big argument. I was exhausted from it, and I just didn't want to fight anymore for the night. She finally said to me, "I don't want to look at your face." So I said, "Fine, you don't have to." And so at about 9 o'clock I gathered up my pillows and went and laid down on the couch and fell asleep. Then I woke up at 2:30 on the dot almost. I had to use the bathroom, so I went to do that, then came back and laid down on the couch. I just got this weird feeling, and it was just too quiet in the house, so I poked my head into the bedroom to check. My girlfriend was fast asleep, and our 10-month-old son was sound asleep in his crib. I figured, what the hell, I'm over it, and slowly climbed into bed and went to sleep. Now I live in Arizona. It's been kind of rainy and cool the last few days, and to us, it's so nice that our bedroom window was open. There was a nice slow breeze coming in, and it was very relaxing. All of a sudden, I'm awoken by my son. He's crying very loudly, and was standing up in his crib, which is very unusual. Unlike most babies, he slept through the night since he was born. Sure, he makes little noises and rolls around a little, but usually finds his pacifier and dozes back off to sleep. I open my eyes to see my girlfriend has already gotten him, and she picks him up and all of a sudden stops crying. I check the time and it's 3. I'm like, maybe it's just one of those nights. So she brings him over and puts him between us. He rolls, makes noises, but doesn't want to go to sleep, so she makes him a bottle. While he's eating, I doze back off to sleep. Now I'm dreaming, but I'm still in bed, in the same position. It's dark and everything's quiet, except I can hear someone crying, weeping and moaning, like a woman grieving someone close to her has just passed. It's a long, drawn-out cry, and eerie like the breeze coming through the window. All of a sudden, my eyes jolt open, and there's sweat dripping down my forehead. I can still hear the cry, but this time I know I'm awake, so it's real. I spin around fast, and that's when I see her. She's tall, dressed in all black, like she just came from a funeral. Her face distressed, like she's been mourning for eternity. The wind came through the window behind her, and it's so strong the curtain is blowing like a flag. I see her as she reaches for my son who's lying asleep between me and my girlfriend. So I did what any father would do. I grabbed the blanket with my left hand and came down over with my arm over my son, and the blanket covering both of us so that I could hold him tight. All of a sudden, a sheer scream rings out from what I assume to be the woman, and a gust of wind hits the window hard, and then there's quiet. Nothing but my girlfriend's snoring and my son's breathing, and my very heavy breath is all that can be heard, and a slight little breeze that rattles the blinds on the windows. So I lie awake for a little while and eventually fall asleep clutching my son. I woke up this morning and asked my girlfriend if she heard anything last night. Yeah, I thought I heard someone crying, but it sounded like it was coming from outside. At that point I knew it was real. Now I'm a big, burly guy with a beard, not afraid of much, and I was a tough kid growing up. But when I was a kid I was afraid of one thing. After I went to a friend's house, and his uncle told us the story of La Llorona, a Mexican folklore tale that I always believed was real. I never really wanted to stay outside after dark and never slept with my window open. Of course, I never told anyone, because like I said, I'm tough and didn't want any of my friends to think I'm a coward. But she's real, and I'll be keeping a much closer eye on my son from now on. We live in a court in an upscale neighborhood, in a large city in the US. Our court faces the expressway, and directly across from our house is a PG&E campus that has a pretty good open field that you can cut through to reach the streets and exit the neighborhood, and get back onto the expressway. My parents were out at a concert, and my sister was at home, and it was about 7:30 p.m. when I decided to head to my boyfriend's house, who lives 5 minutes away. Now, before I left, I had this weird nagging feeling that I need to leave our living room light on, as well as the porch lights. This is important for later. So I left them on, got in my car and drove to my boyfriend's house. An hour later I get a notification on my phone that the Ring camera that is positioned at our front porch went off. I immediately knew something was wrong, because I knew no one was supposed to be home for a while. So I opened up the app and didn't see anything, and I'm waiting for the video to populate and see a guy in a black hoodie walk up to our porch, knock on the door, then moving away from the porch into the dark. Now the way our camera is positioned makes it difficult to see his face, but my dad was adamant that guy had a mask on. About a minute after that I get notified again, and it shows the guy walking back up to the door, knocking a bit louder, then moving away from the porch again. At this point, I knew it wasn't a prank, so I let off the siren through the app, hoping it would deter him. But when I didn't see him in the camera, I knew he had gone through the backyard, so I called the cops. The way the dispatcher was talking to me, it almost seemed like she thought it was a false alarm, but I was insistent that someone was trying to break in. She asked me to drive back to my house, and once I get there to call them back. I feel like unless I called them back, they had no intentions of sending a cop to check on things. My boyfriend and I drive up to my house and don't pull up in the driveway, but park across from my house and turn off my car lights. I had left my sister's window blinds open, thank God, and kept looking at the window from my car, as I knew that it was the only way to see into the house, and dialed the cops again. 30 seconds into the call, I noticed flashlights through the window, and I told the dispatcher. I initially thought it could have been a car driving from the other side of the house, but that thought was shot within 10 seconds when I saw the silhouette of a man looking through the window. The moment I saw the silhouette, I yelled into the phone, "Someone's in my house. Please hurry." The dispatcher told us to drive out of the court and park a bit away for safety while we wait for the cops. About a minute or two of us sitting in the car and checking behind us, my boyfriend yelled, "I see him walking ahead." And we see a guy in a black hoodie, holding a bag, fast walking down the street to our right and hiding behind the shadows of a corner house. We later put two and two together, and we think he left my house, cut through the PG&E grassy area, and tried to escape down the street, not knowing my car was parked there. I saw him and shined my high beams on him, so he knew I saw him, and at that point he began running towards a parked SUV that was parked in front of us the entire time. He got in the car and immediately turned it on and started driving. At that point, adrenaline kicked in for me, and I floored it while trying to catch up with him while the dispatcher and my boyfriend are telling me to stop driving and park because it isn't safe to chase after him. 10 seconds after we park and the SUV is turning right, I see a cop behind us and immediately rolled down my window and gestured to the cop that that's the guy that's driving ahead of us, and he floored it to catch up with him. The cop came back and told me that he missed him and didn't see in which direction the guy fled, but drove back to my house and were met by 5 more cops and a K9 unit, and a helicopter hovering over the whole valley in search for him. Turns out the guy broke through my parents' window and focused his attention on their room and stole thousands of dollars worth of jewelry, including my parents' wedding jewelry, as well as my grandparents' and aunt's jewelry. My aunt passed away from cancer over 10 years ago. When he reached mine and my sister's room, is when I had pulled up to the house because he's rummaging through a bit of our stuff, but absolutely nothing was stolen from our rooms. The cops believed that I bought myself time to get to the house by leaving the lights on, because he took extra time to ensure no one was home, and that gave me time to pull up to my house and deter him before he stole more. They still haven't caught the guy, but I guess a house down the street from ours was broken into hours before ours was. Maybe 10 minutes away from ours. The cops believed the guy tried to blend into the neighborhood for that extra hour, so he bought himself time for the cops to stop searching so that he could move on. There were numerous reports of suspicious SUVs parked with its lights off in other surrounding neighborhoods just sitting there, which is why the cops believed he was trying to blend in and buy time. To the person who broke into our home and stole my parents' priceless jewelry and made us now live in fear, let's not meet again. This happened when I was 12. I was babysitting for a family with 2 little girls. I babysat for them fairly frequently, and they lived around the corner. The father was weird and intense, and would ask me to do weird things like be a bartender at a party they were throwing, or encourage me to try on his wife's clothing and play dress-up. He asked personal questions about my boyfriends and what I did with them, not that I had any. The wife, which should be noted, was never around for these interactions. One night I was babysitting, and after putting the girls to bed, I started hearing weird sounds from upstairs. I was about to call my dad to come investigate for me when the father came down the stairs wearing nothing but his tidy-whities. He had been there the whole time waiting for his girls to go to bed. I jumped up and ran for the door, and he called after me that he hadn't been feeling so good, so he stayed home, and that he would pay me. I just left and booked it home. I was weirdly embarrassed, so I didn't tell my parents. I just decided I'd never babysit for them again. After that, my mum started getting weird phone calls while I was at school. Someone just breathing into the phone or asking if I was home. This was before cell phones and caller IDs, around the mid-90s. This culminated with her getting a phone call where a man told my mother that he was going to get me and detailed exactly what he was planning on doing to me. My mum never told me exactly what he said, but it was bad enough she called the police. The police were able to track the number to the creepy father. I didn't know what was happening until the cops showed up to my school to escort me home, because the creepy father wasn't home. He was outside my room waiting for me. The man went to jail and then to the inpatient psych. He sent me letters from the hospital, which was in violation of the restraining order he had been granted, so we went from the hospital back to jail. Man in your underwear, let's never meet again. When I was 13, I was home sick with the flu. I was walking past one of the windows when I saw the mailman walk across the street. Out of nowhere, a car came and hit him. The driver got out the car and started attacking the mailman repeatedly. It looked like he was doing it with a sharp weapon. He stopped and ran off down the street. I called my mom and told her what I saw, and she thought I was hallucinating. She told me to go lay down since I had a fever of around 103. When she got home, she noticed that I was obviously rattled from what I saw. Turns out the guy lived right around the corner from us and was severely deranged. They found him later that day. He was committed and his family moved out of town. The mailman lived and was back to delivering a few months later. My parents were both DJs at a local Christian radio station in Birmingham at the time, and my sister was a kindergartner, so my parents were in need of childcare for me, and I was 4 and not yet in school. For context, this took place in the mid-80s. They really couldn't afford much in the way of a sitter, so they hired someone they thought they could trust, the teenage daughter of a co-worker. I believe her name was Shaniqua, and I don't remember much about her except she scared me, and rightly so. I'm grateful our brains have good coping mechanisms that we can't even control, because I don't really remember any of the events leading up to the revelation. I'm certain my brain has blocked all of those memories, but I remember this moment in time crystal clear, surprisingly for my age at the time. I remember it was nighttime, bath time before bed. My mother was downstairs on the phone. My sister had already had her bath, so it was my turn. My dad had run the water, tested it to be sure it was right, and I was standing in the bathroom wrapped in what seemed to be a huge bath towel, while I waited for him to give me the okay, get in the tub. In reality, it was probably just a regular-sized towel, but to 4-year-old me, it seemed like the size of a bedsheet. My loving dad finished running the water, turned it off, and proceeded to tell me to hop in the tub. I was a silly little girl and thought it would be funny to get in and shake my booty at my dad, because what kid doesn't think booty shaking isn't hilarious? I clearly remember the mood suddenly getting very still and heavy. Then I heard my dad tell me to get out the tub. He was serious. I was certain I'd done something wrong. Maybe my booty shaking had made him mad. I was just trying to be silly. I didn't mean to get into trouble, but I obeyed and got out the tub. He gently wrapped me around my towel, reassured me I hadn't done anything wrong, but that I needed to go downstairs to my mama. I was so confused. I had no clue what was going on, but since I knew I wasn't in trouble yet, my dad was graven. Had something bad happened? I went down to my mama to wait for her to get off the phone and to hear what my dad had to tell her. While he stood there with his hands gently placed on my shoulders, my mum could tell by the serious look on his face and the confused look on my face that something was terribly wrong. She asked the person on the other end of the line to hold, covered the mouthpiece, and waited for my dad to explain what this turn of events meant. He gently told me to turn around while he unwrapped me from my towel, with my backside facing my mother. I heard her gasp, tell the person on the other end of the line she needed to go, and then silence. She didn't say anything for a long time, and then she asked my dad what happened. He had no idea. They asked me what had happened and who had done this to me. I had no idea what they were talking about. I was just as confused as they were. Then they told me my whole backside, especially my bottom, was completely black and blue. After some discussion onto how this could have happened, who could have done this, they realized it was the babysitter. She had taken it upon herself to punish me when I wasn't doing what she thought I should be, or what she deemed bad. I can recall very few times seeing my father that angry. Angry enough that he had no words, just raw fury. My mother, however, had plenty of words, and all of them directed at the babysitter and her mother. To this day I don't know what she said to her, but I do know that Shaniqua never watched me again, and I cannot recall if I ever saw that family again. I know my parents didn't press charges, but I also know they became very, very vigilant when it came to someone watching their children. Just a year ago, my sister and I talked about that period of time when Shaniqua was our babysitter. She was mostly mine, but would watch my sister when she came home from kindergarten. I told my sister I can hardly remember any of the time she watched us, and I remember my sister going slightly pale and telling me, "I can." I asked her if she was ever punished by Shaniqua like how I was, and my sister told me this: "No, she never beat me, but I remember when she would beat you. I remember her taking you into the back room, and I remember hearing the wooden spoon hitting your butt and your crying, and I'm so sorry that I never stood up for you." I've been fishing the backwaters for about a year and a half now, both in canoe and on boat. The first few times I was out there, however, I was just fishing from land near Biscayne Bay. Keep in mind, this is not far out wilderness. I walked at most 1 kilometer from the nearest walking trail through the mangroves to find a fully loaded establishment, built from both driftwood and wood brought in from the mangroves. I'm talking a 3-story loft with a bar and stools on the first floor, a ladder leading up to a platform midway through the canopy where you can access a bathroom, which is a hole in the floor, and the 3rd floor, a viewing platform with a sofa 20 feet above ground. The only way up these makeshift floors is through a shoddy handcrafted driftwood ladder. I asked my buddy how is any of this possible, and he said, "Well, I've never seen the man responsible for this, and nor I am sure I really want to meet him, considering we're trespassing in someone's luxury mangrove suite. I thought it'd be best to get the hell out of there." I was around 12 when I had gotten a babysitting job with a family across town. This family was new to the area and just recently bought the house next to my best friend's place. The first day over was to get familiar with the kids and the house. The parents stayed and evaluated me and of course answered any questions I had. I spent my time playing and keeping the children occupied. A boy named Devon, age 4, and a girl named Cameron, age 7. So I had my work cut out for me. Cameron wanted me to go to her room so she could show me her toys. I followed her up the 2 flights of stairs, but as we came to the top of the stairs I felt strangely lightheaded, and the hairs on my arms rose up. I had an intense feeling of being watched, like there was someone else up there with us. I tried to ignore the sensation and continue with my duties of finding Cameron's favorite doll so that we could go back downstairs. At the end of the day, it was decided I was a good match and I was coming back on Saturday morning. As I headed home, I couldn't shake that feeling I got from that upstairs. I told myself it was nothing and brushed it off to just being a new place and unfamiliar surroundings. That Saturday morning, I showed up to a busy home as the parents tried to get out the door and show me the last-minute things I needed for the day ahead. The kids were up in their PJs eating breakfast and already talking to me about all the fun things they wanted to do. After the parents left, I ushered the kids off to get changed. As I was cleaning up breakfast dishes, I heard the loud bang coming from the dining room. I ran into the room and found one of the false ceiling tiles had fallen from its place. Puzzled, I tried to put it back, but it wasn't an easy task. After some struggling, I managed to fit it back in, and thought to myself how it could have fallen out by itself. The day went on, and now it's close to lunchtime. The kids are watching TV, and I'm in the kitchen making something for lunch when I hear a loud bang coming from the dining area again. I look, and sure enough, the tile has come out again. This time I left it for the parents to see when they got home. Maybe they can fix it, I thought. Now, the kids wanted to play hide and seek. We started off with Cameron seeking and myself and Devon hiding. As Cameron started, we scurried around trying to find the best hiding place. I found the downstairs bathroom to be the best place for me, so it was easy enough for Cameron to find me, and I hid Devon close to me so I could keep an eye on him. As I entered the bathroom, I closed the door quietly behind me. I walked a few steps into the room and was now facing the mirror. As I was looking at my reflection, I also noticed something behind me, moving. It was the closet door directly behind me, slowly opening. The closet door opened halfway and then slowly closed again on its own. I had the same feeling come over me like I did when I was upstairs on my first day. Wide-eyed with fear, I turned to the bathroom door and ran out. All I could think of was what just happened. I was really starting to worry that this house was haunted, and now I had every horror movie I ever watched playing through my head. Now I'm finding I'm really uncomfortable, but decide it's best for me to keep occupied. I break out a board game for us to play on the living room floor, Hungry Hippo. We were playing for about 20 minutes before I noticed something moving from the corner of my eye. I turned my head to see what it was, and it was a child's shoe tumbling across the floor by itself. The kids stopped and watched in confusion. I was in disbelief. Cameron let out a scream and she ran for the door. I grabbed up Devon and followed. We went to my friend's house next door and told her mum everything. I'm not sure if she even believed me, but we stayed over there till the parents got home. Then they showed up and told them what we saw. I don't think they believed me either. I showed them the panel that fell out. Apparently it's been an issue since they moved in, and as for the rest of my accounts, they chalked it up to an overactive imagination. I know what I saw and felt, and I wasn't imagining it. I later found out a bit of backstory about the house itself. Apparently a man passed away there of a heart attack in the upstairs room above the dining room, where the panel kept falling out. I think his spirit is still in that house, trying to play with us. This happened 8 years ago, during the summertime. I was at my mum's house, but she barely lived there anymore, as she spent most of her time at her boyfriend's, and my sister was very often left alone. I was a student in another city, but I came back in my house during these holidays. I was 19 and my sister was 16 at the time. Our house had 2 floors, a living room and a kitchen on the first, 3 bedrooms and a bathroom on the second. The kitchen and living room had 2 door windows opening to a large terrace. From the terrace, you could go into the backyard by some stairs. We didn't really use the ground floor as it was very dark due to the small windows, and it was basically a garage and office just to do our homework. It's summer and very hot. I just discovered Game of Thrones and had 2 seasons to watch. Every evening, I took my laptop, made myself comfortable on the terrace near the kitchen, and watched an episode. My garden was surrounded by a U-shaped building, so you could see my terrace very well as my garden from the balconies. Some workmen were there for a few days, and had been working late, so I often saw them as I watched my series. They were minding their own business, and I did the same, and didn't think much of it. One morning I was sleeping late, and my sister woke me up with a whisper. "There's a man in the house." I was half naked because of the heavy heat of that summer. I stood up, perfectly awake now, grabbed a shirt and went downstairs practically running. I know this is a dumb thing I do, a half-naked, helpless young woman, but I'm very protective of my little sister, and I didn't feel any fear at this point. I went down to the kitchen and couldn't find a sharp object, so I took a fork, and when I asked her where she saw him, she told me she was watching TV in the living room, and because the windows were open, she saw a man in the reflection standing just behind her. She jumped off the couch to find herself in front of him. He was a tall man in his late 30s. She had no chance in a fight. The guy had one of his feet on the first step to the second floor where I was sleeping. She shouted, "Who are you?" to receive no reply, and just walked quietly back into the kitchen where the door window was wide open, and took the stairs back up to the garden. As soon as I heard that, I ran into the back garden with my harmless weapon to the gate in our front garden. I even went in the street looking for him. I'm sure that if I had found him, I would not have been so brave anymore, and would have maybe peed myself. But there was no one. Suddenly I realized my sister was still alone in the house, and perhaps he'd gone back. I returned to the kitchen, searched the house, but it turns out we were alone. That's when I realized my computer was missing. My sister told me that the guy didn't have anything in his hands when he left. That was the scariest part, because it meant he was either in the house for quite some time before he took the laptop and came back to do whatever he planned to do, or there was someone else there. I got dressed, and my sister and I went to the nearby police station. I'm very angry with the policeman. She was a minor, so stayed with her, and she told them everything and described the guy with a lot of detail. They asked if we could recognize him, and she said that, without a doubt, she could. They said, "You know, it's highly unlikely that we find him. You should be thankful that you and your sister didn't have anything worse happen." Almost like she needed to be more scared. When we got back home, she was afraid, and I was angry with the loss of my expensive laptop that I needed for art school and had all my pictures in it. We sat there at the terrace and spoke about what happened and how lucky we were that she saw the man before he came upstairs. This is when I noticed the workmen weren't there anymore. From my street, no one can even know we have a backyard and another entrance to the house. My sister told me he was acting like he knew a bit of the house. Maybe it wasn't the first time, and we didn't even notice he had been there before. I'm now certain it was one of those men working in that neighborhood balcony who'd been watching me that broke in that morning. From that day, we double-locked the doors and slept in the same bed for weeks. I'm a 30-year-old female, and we live in a small town in South Africa, in an area that's quite susceptible to robberies and break-ins. Now, our bedroom used to be the old carport, so it's closest to the street, passing the front of the house where we have a big-ass tree in the middle of our driveway. The streetlights tend to be broken a lot, so a lot of the times it's completely dark out front. Now, this particular night, or maybe early morning, it was definitely after midnight, I heard a strange noise. I didn't know whether it was a dream or not, since I used light sleeping medication, but it sounded so clear. The sound of a stick or something being dragged along the entire length of the side of the front fence, up and down, up and down. In my stupor, I wanted to get up and go have a look at what or who it was that was making the noise, but I didn't, and after a while just kind of fell asleep again. The next morning, when we were getting ready for work, I told my husband what I'd heard. Now, he said that he didn't hear anything like that himself, but since he's quite a heavy sleeper, that's not really odd. But that his friend, who lives just 2 houses down from the road, told us a similar story just the week before. The difference here is that he actually went out with his firearm to confront whoever was in the street, and found some weird skinny guy in front of his gate, holding a machete, dragging it along the fence. He yelled at him to get off their property, but the guy just stood there, seeming to be quite stoned. He didn't even register that someone was there, yelling at him. It was only after our friend actually fired a warning shot that he ran off. We heard later that apparently the skinny guy is some homeless person that's been taking illegal substances and wandering around the neighborhood causing trouble, and that the police were looking for him for quite a while. But I haven't seen the guy nor heard the sound or anything about that since. I'm fairly sure it's the same guy, but I'd rather not find out. When I was around 12, my family and I moved into a semi-detached house just up the street from our previous home. The house wasn't very big, and the floor plan for our part of the house was completely different from our neighbors. Our neighbors were a lovely little family of 4. Husband is from England, wife from Norway, which is where I live, and they also had a 3-year-old girl and a 6-month-old baby boy. Now I love children, always have, and at that time I really wanted to start babysitting. It's quite common to start babysitting at age 12, and I was turning 13 in a month later anyway, so I wanted to find some small job. As we got to know our neighbors over the first few months of living there, my parents told the neighbors that if they ever needed a sitter, then it would be nice if they would consider trying me out. Seeing as it would be my first job as a babysitter, we thought it would be smart to start with my next door neighbors, seeing as my parents would literally be on the other side of the wall in case anything happened. Cut to a Friday night when my neighbors went to a party that was happening just down our street. I got there at 8 p.m, and the parents told me they would be home around 2 to 3. Both kids were already asleep, so they just told me to put a movie on and relax. Now these kids were the easiest to babysit ever. Once you put them to bed and they fell asleep, absolutely nothing would wake them. They are some of the heaviest sleepers I've ever seen, so babysitting them was usually pretty uneventful. I was on the couch watching Avatar in the living room on the 2nd floor. The kids had their own separate bedrooms that were just downstairs where the front door was. I could basically see their bedrooms from where I was sitting, as the place was quite small. Because of the hallway, I couldn't see the front door. Now, again, this house was very small, so as long as the TV wasn't on too loud, then I could hear everything that happened downstairs. At around midnight, I heard the front door unlock, and my neighbors walked in there while talking. I heard them close the door, and that they started taking off their jackets and shoes. I thought it was a bit weird that they hadn't called to let me know that they were coming home early. I just assumed that it must have slipped their mind, so I went down to greet them. I could hear them talking, up until the point that I came around the corner to the hallway that led to the door, to find there wasn't anyone there. The talking fell silent the moment I turned the corner, and the only sound that could be heard was from the upstairs TV. My heart started beating so fast and my head was rushing. I ran to the bedrooms and checked the kids before I searched the rest of the house. I opened every door, checked every cabinet for anything that could explain what had just happened. But there was nothing there. The kids were still sound asleep. Eventually, I convinced myself I was imagining things. I checked on the kids one last time and made sure the doors were wide open so that I could see them from upstairs. I sat down to finish the movie while trying to process what had just happened. But when I sat down, I noticed the TV had been shut off, even though I'd left it on. When I turned it back on, there was just snow on the screen. I couldn't for the life of me get it to work again. That's when the talking downstairs started up once more. Not only that, but the baby started screaming. This child never woke up from naps and definitely would never scream the way it did that night. I've never ran so fast in my life down the stairs. I rushed towards the baby's bedroom only to find the door closed. I ripped it open, picked up the baby and rushed to pick up his sister, and took both of them upstairs and held those kids for almost 3 hours before they came home. The talking and sounds downstairs came and went as I had the kids with me on the couch. I held them as close to me as I could and tried my best to keep them asleep. As their parents came home, I was too scared to walk downstairs to greet them. I couldn't be sure if it was actually them or not, until they walked up the stairs where they found me clutching their children. Obviously, they noticed I was upset and asked me what happened. I honestly felt like I'd lost my mind at that point, but told them the story anyway. After I was finished, they told me that it wasn't the first time that anything like that had happened there. Apparently, they heard the voices all the time at night. I was kind of mortified that they didn't think to warn me before, but they said they were sorry that this happened to me, and the mum walked me home to my house. I slept with the lights on in my room for almost a month after that. Believe it or not, I did go back and I babysat those kids again. I am an 18-year-old male, 6'1" and 190 pounds. I live in Seattle and work at a local grocery store, as my father insisted on me getting a job amidst coronavirus, and grocery stores are the few places hiring nowadays. I work at 5 a.m. and wake up at 4 a.m. I don't mind it because I get off early. It's still dark when I arrive at the store, and I always have to call the store to ask for the produce workers to let me in. As I was walking up to the door, I see an average-looking man, probably in his late 30s. He doesn't work at my store, and he was clearly tweaking out, moving around in crazy motions. Perhaps he was on something, and it was common to find needles in the bathroom of the store. As I was waiting for the door to be opened, he was facing me about 8 feet away, not looking at me, but past me. He was chanting some weird stuff, something like, "Satan will come, Satan knows." He kept repeating those lines. I was just standing at the door like, what is this dude on? Someone let me in already. Nothing else strange happens at work that day, and I get off at 9 a.m. as I'm the only worker who worked a 4-hour shift that day. As I'm driving home, I get a call and the ID said it was from a nearby city. I answer, and I can literally only hear a guy breathing. I'm just sitting there thinking this is some corny prank, since the audio was playing through the speaker of my car. His breathing was amplified, so I'm not sure if it was intentional. I read one time that if someone keeps you on the phone for long enough, they can get your IP address. I'm not certain of this though. He then says my full name in a tone of a question, but also weirdly strange and excited kind of way that made me feel tremendously uneasy. This was very stupid of me to confirm, but I said, "Yeah, who's this?" Then he pauses and hangs up. I realized a few hours later he sounded exactly alike to the satanic dude from the mourning, except sober. I get paranoid fairly easily, but this was a red flag and sent chills down my spine. I tried to call the number back, but as you imagine, it was disconnected. The next day I arrive at work with no troubles and leave at 9 a.m. I get home at about 9:20 and see my father's car in the driveway, as he is usually home at this time. The front door to my house was unlocked. I shouldn't think anything of this because my dad was at home, right? I walk in, take off my shoes and call out for my dad because I brought in his mail. Before I explain this next part, you need to understand that many noises people hear are misidentified as something it truly is not, or their mind is playing games with them, or it's just the house making noises. But there was a very specific noise that my parents' bed frame makes because it's wood, when someone is rolling around on it. I know this sound very well because my room is right next to theirs, and my dad is an extremely light sleeper. And anytime I drop something or make a relatively loud sound, I can hear him rolling on his bed as I disturbed him. I call out for my dad as I'm walking up the stairs, and there's no response, only the noise of that bed frame moving. I later that day rolled around in the bed to confirm the noise, and heard that you need a significant amount of weight on the bed to cause that sound. This was when I got scared as hell, because my dad wakes up very early and there's no way he was taking a nap at 9:30 a.m. I'm already at the top of the stairs at this point, so I burst into my room and closed my door and listened through our paper-thin walls and I genuinely heard someone whispering, and then the springs releasing as if someone was sitting up on the edge, and then stood up. If he was whispering, that means there could potentially be 2 people in the house, and I could be in real danger. I instinctually grabbed my dresser and dragged it in front of my door. That thing weighs about 150 pounds, and it took me a little while to drag it in front. My heart was pounding. I was worried that the intruder or intruders would catch on to what I was doing and break through the door before I had the chance to do it. I slammed the dresser down in front of my door to not waste any more time. No one was getting through that door. I felt slightly more relaxed and called my dad, and I started to get nervous because he didn't answer, but he sometimes went on walks around the neighborhood at this time. Just as I tried to call him, I saw him walking up the street from our bedroom window and shouted that it wasn't safe for him to come into the house. At first, he laughed it off and then proceeded up the driveway, as nothing like this has ever happened. I repeated myself, but this time I screamed at him. Now he knew I was serious. He could see the fear in my eyes. He stepped back a few feet and asked what the hell was going on, and I felt I didn't really have time to explain and just told him to wait. Once I confirmed my father was safe, I dialed 911, and the intruders next to me must have heard it, because when I got off the phone they ran down the stairs. I was worried for my dad at this point because he was just outside, and I had to move the dresser again from my door as I was in a panicked state, and left my room and ran down the stairs to see nothing except my dad, who was still confused at this point about the back door being wide open. The cops got there 12 minutes later and came up with nothing. No evidence of forced entry, literally nothing besides the wide open back door and someone's mud tracked in the house, which really annoyed me. Could the man whispering have been the one who was talking to Satan the other day? How did he know my name on the phone? Can someone track you if they know your number and full name? Were these people trying to take me? This only happened a while ago, and I've been scared ever since, worrying they might return. I also have sleep paralysis and it's gotten a lot worse lately, and if you had it before, you know it sucks. So, that's my story. Feel free to leave a comment and write a note about your thoughts. I'm a female, 27. At the time of this story I was 19. I was living in Littleton, which is a suburb of Denver. I lived and worked within the same block, working at a hair salon, and lived in an apartment across the street and behind the salon. I lived with 4 other people in a studio apartment. Yes, it was chaos, but I was young and dumb and worked so much I was only there to sleep. While working at the salon, I met people of all walks of life. Most were nice and hard-working like me. In the plaza where the salon was, there happened to be an abundance of loiterers, homeless drunks mostly, and there was a particular man who I often saw. He was an older gentleman. He always smelt like booze, but was nice enough. Quite the flirt, which was uncomfortable for 19-year-old me. On several occasions, he asked me to come hang out and drink with him. I always refused because of my boyfriend, telling him that he wouldn't be pleased. And for the life of me, I'm pretty sure his name is Mark. One afternoon after getting off work at around 4, I started to meander my way across the parking lot to the coffee shop. I ordered my drink and took it outside to sit and enjoy the sunny weather. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mark approaching me rapidly, a broad smile across his face asking me for a lighter. Begrudgingly, I obliged, passing it all over, and Mark lights his cigarette and returns the lighter to me. As he's not so graceful, he brushes past my arm, and a disgusted chill ran up my spine. I pulled away and stood up, saying it was time for me to go. Mark begged me to come and drink with him again, and I refused. After that, I didn't see him for several weeks. It was bliss, since I felt like he was always lurking around the plaza, waiting for some sorry soul to look his way. Then one night I decided to go for a walk around the neighborhood. I preferred night walks because it wasn't so hot, and I went around through downtown Littleton and looped back to my apartment complex. Then, as I was about 10 minutes away from home, a figure appeared on the walkway ahead of me. At first, I thought nothing of it, since a lot of people were out and about, but as I got closer, I recognized the person. It was Mark. He swayed this way and that way on the cement, nearly falling into the road. This is where I made my mistake. I should have crossed the road or turned around, but instead I decided to walk past him, hoping he wouldn't know who I am. Alas, no dice. Mark got in my way and stopped, smiling that broad smile once again. I sighed, resigned my fate of having to talk to him, and asked him how he was and if he had a good day. He said he did, but that it would be better if he had some drinking company. I said not I, because I had to work early in the morning the next day. But unfortunately he was unbothered and continued to beg, trying the drunk puppy dog eyes on me. I was slightly uneasy, but otherwise unmoved. Laughing awkwardly, I tried to edge my way around him. He held out his arm, blocking my path with a serious face, and I demanded that Mark move out of my way so that I could go home. For some reason, this flipped a switch within him. Suddenly angry, he grabbed me by the arm, holding me tightly. I winced and tried to shake him off, but Mark wouldn't relent. He took another step towards me, grabbed my other arm, and immediately I knew it was going to bruise. The pain sent me into fight or flight. My body picked both. First, I shoved Mark hard into the shrubbery behind him. Then I took off, sprinting down the sidewalk. I didn't stop until I burst through the doors of my apartment, dissolved into tears, and fell to the floor. I alarmed my roommates, and they comforted and questioned me. After I pulled myself together, I told them what Mark did. My boyfriend was furious and stormed out the room with a bat in hand and his friends hot on his heels. My other roommates stayed with me. When my boyfriend and his friends returned, they said, luckily for Mark, that they couldn't find him. We thought of calling the cops, but rejected the idea because we weren't totally on the right side of the law, as pot wasn't legal in our state yet. So instead I brought pepper spray and started carrying a weapon with me, and it did make me feel much safer. But I stopped going on walks after dark, unless I was in the company of my boyfriend. Strangely, I never saw Mark after that night, though I was completely okay with it. So wherever you are, Mark, just leave me alone next time, or I may be forced to poke a hole in you. This next story also happened while living in Littleton, Colorado. So that you might better understand me, this was when I was also 19. To give you a better image of what I looked like, I was 5'7" and 130 pounds, and had wildly coloured red hair, several facial piercings, and arm and chest tattoos. It was a warm day, so I was wearing weather-comfortable clothes, shorts and a tank top, along with a pair of flip-flops and a sun hat. Because of the previous situations I found myself in, I've stopped taking night walks. Instead, I went in the late afternoon. I had let my boyfriend take my truck to work because I didn't have to work that day and had no plans, but I wanted to surprise him at work and take him to dinner after he got off, so I started walking up Broadway towards Colfax. Now, if you've ever lived in Denver or have been there for any amount of time, people will generally warn you about Colfax Avenue. It's busy, and some sketchy wildlife lives there and stalks the street. But for some reason, my oh-so-awesome roommates did not warn this little girl about the many horrors that could await you on Colfax Avenue. Okay, that may be a tad dramatic, but my experience was not pleasant in the least. I turned from Broadway onto Colfax. As soon as I turned, I was stepping into another world almost. There was a bus stop and it was bumping. I'm pretty sure I saw a guy taking bumps pressed against the nearest building. Several homeless people were laying and sitting in various places in the street. 2 women were screaming at each other about something, and I walked quickly 2 or 3 blocks with my heart in my throat. I'm not cut out for this sort of social interaction. I accidentally made eye contact with a dirty man lurking in an alleyway. Quickly I looked down at my flip-flops and walked on. After a few blocks, the crowd thinned out a bit, and I was feeling less frazzled. I was actually starting to enjoy my walk and the people watching what I was doing. But then I noticed this van. It was parked on a side street, trying to look inconspicuous, because I could see the driver slide down his seat a little. I couldn't make out the details, but I could see it was an older male with a dark complexion and short dark hair, trying not to stare for too long. I committed this creeper van to memory. It was white with darkened windows, no company markings and no front license plate. Red flags are going off in my head, but I push away the feeling and I walk around another block or two to see the van on a side street. It's moved up a few blocks as well. I get a nervous chill. Though I press on trying not to look scared, after another couple of blocks I see this van again. I don't like where I think it's heading, so I stand my ground to face this van, staring into this man's face and waiting for a reaction for him to notice me. To my horror, he gets out the van, slamming the door behind him. He's a small Hispanic man, about 5'4", and shorter than me, but definitely bigger. My mind is racing as he runs down the road towards me. I'm frozen. I wasn't expecting this. As soon as he reaches me, he starts speaking in broken English that I can mostly understand. He compliments me, my hair, piercings, freckles, and butt. Oh joy, awkward. Awkwardly I thank him, now confused. What does he want? Why is he so brave? Then he asks for intimacy. I nearly choke and ask him to repeat himself, not sure if I heard him correctly, but I was. He pulled out his wallet and offered me 2 $100 bills. I take a large step back as he grabs my butt and then licks his lips. I harshly tell him I'm not that kind of girl, and he's barking up the wrong tree. I turn and speed walk away from this guy, starting to panic, and I'm trying to think of a plan. The man is following me, waving the 200s around like it would convince me to go back. The first door I see I run to and yank open. I throw myself in at max speed and bounce to the bouncer. I fall on my butt with a yelp, and the bouncer helps me up and asks why I'm in such a hurry. I'm too flustered to talk as he's asking for ID. I look around and realize that I'm in a pub. I tell him on the verge of tears I'm only 19 and trying to hide from a guy outside. I'm practically having a panic attack as the bouncer guides me to the bar and fetches me a glass of water. The bouncer wants a description of the man and I give it. He tells me to hang tight and disappeared round the door. A few minutes later he tells me the van won't be a problem anymore. Reasonably, I'm still scared. My new hero asks me where I'm heading and I check on my GPS on my phone. Only 2 blocks to my boyfriend's work. The bouncer clocks out on his break and offers to walk me the remaining 2 blocks. I beam and latch onto the guy's arm, thanking him repeatedly. He pats my hand, laughing, telling me to keep off Colfax from this point on, and I promised I would. When we walked into my boyfriend's work, he gave me a quizzical look. I thanked the bouncer again and sent him on his way. I explained what happened to the man and he laughed at me. Perhaps I deserved that, but no one warned me. I didn't take him to dinner that night and never walked that street alone again. So creeper in the creepy van, stay away from me and keep your $200 for something less creepy. I was babysitting for these 2 ladies who each had a son. They wanted to go out, so I stayed at one of their houses and watched their boys. It was around 8 p.m. and the boys were sitting on the couch, playing on their iPads and whatnot, when someone knocked on the door. I asked them if anyone was supposed to come over, and both of them said no. I go over and check the eye hole in the door, and it's some guy in a grey hoodie, deliberately hunched over so I can't see his face. Immediately I'm like, nope, and don't say anything and start pacing around, because I don't want to give him any inclination we're inside. A few minutes later I check outside the little window through the curtains and he's gone. I didn't want to spook the kids anymore, and there weren't any more knocks, so I just left it as kind of a prank. Cut to a few hours later and the mums get back. They ask me how everything was and I say the kids were great, but someone had knocked on the door. They ask me what time and I say around 8. and one of the mums starts freaking out and going through her phone. The other tells me that right around that time someone had been making strange phone calls to them on a blocked number. They had disguised their voice and were saying things like, "I can see you through the window." They didn't think it was serious because it didn't make sense in the context of where they were. But in retrospect, they were almost positive it was me he was looking at through the window. They escorted me to the car, and I touched base with them later, and apparently nothing strange ever happened after that, and the ladies have no clue who it could have been. But I'm just really glad I didn't open the door, because I have a feeling in my gut it would have been really bad. I was born in the 60s and didn't think I'd live to see 30 because I did drugs, drank and loved to drive fast and ride with friends that drove faster. I was a loner. Even very young, I'd walk all around our town alone. My grandma's house was 2 blocks from the fairgrounds, and as a small girl, I'd watch the show parade of fairgoers that you never seemed to see around the town the rest of the year. I was 14, the bicentennial, when the fair came to town in 1976. I waited for Grandma to go to sleep and walked to the darkened carnival. Most of the carnies I met were in their 20s and looked out for me. We smoked together, listened to their biographies, and they're all fascinating people. When we were at high school, there was a popular couple. She a doe-eyed all-American beauty, he a senior, a man, yet had some boy left on his face. Even better, they were 2 of the sweetest people I'd ever met. It was Friday, and talk among the girls all day was that he was going to give her his class ring on their date, which was a huge deal back then. It was a cold winter night when they pulled off the road and parked. He left his truck running to keep the heater on. Neither of them returned home from the date. Family and friends searched through the night. They were found in the morning, perished in each other's arms. You see, where he parked, snow packed into the tailpipe, and they asphyxiated from the fumes. Victims of the poison turned cherry red. I still can't get the picture out of my head of what they must have looked like. Rosy cheeks. Was there frost on them? I grew up where basketball was king. The 3 high schools in my town were rivals on the state level many seasons. When I was there, the varsity basketball players dated the cheerleaders. One Saturday they were hanging out and the guys were shooting hoops. One of the team stars twisted his ankle and had to go to the ER. The boys got in one car and the girls followed in the other. The driver in the front of the car couldn't resist showing off for the girls and had a spectacular crash right in front of their girlfriends. 3 guys walked away, but the 4th lost his life. His girlfriend lost it all at the sight of the body and literally hasn't gotten over it 40 years later. Finally, my boyfriend and I decided we wanted to have sandwiches from the local pizza joint. We picked up our order and drove up to a park that also served as Lover's Lane. My boyfriend killed the headlights and rolled to a stop under a large tree. It was winter and full on dark. As we ate, our eyes became adjusted to the dark, or lack of, and we could make out a sedan parked a couple of cars' lengths away from us. We noticed a guy slumped over on the steering wheel. We didn't think anything about it. We figured he was drunk and parked there to sleep it off. The next day over breakfast, Mum mentioned they found a body in the park. My food stuck in my throat, reading the newspaper. She said the driver hadn't felt well earlier in the day and probably had a massive heart attack as soon as he parked. I grew up in a small town, the type where people don't really lock their doors, at least they didn't used to. When I was 14, I got called to babysit for one of my regulars who had 3 daughters. For context, I'm a female. It was December, so a lot of Christmas work parties were going on. I arrived and we went over to the usual rules. She mentioned the upstairs TV was out, so once I put the girls to bed just to head down and watch TV. So after playing with the girls, I sent them off to bed and went downstairs. I spent a few hours channel surfing and it was about 1:30 a.m., and I remember grabbing the phone, though I can't remember who I was calling, maybe my mom or sister, to let them know I would be home really late. But then I heard the door upstairs open, which sort of surprised me. The mum enjoyed the nights I babysat, as she knew I was a night owl who could be there super late, like until 3 in the morning, provided she held the cab for me, as it was a small town, but I live on the other side of it. As I headed upstairs, I heard someone stumble, so I picked up my pace to make sure she was okay, only to find 3 people I'd never seen before. There was a clearly drunk woman laying in the doorway and 2 guys. The guys looked as surprised as I was. I asked them why they were there, and the girl had slurred out that they were there for the party. I was confused and asked if they knew Helen, the mother. One of the guys looked up at me and down, and I began getting even more uncomfortable about the whole situation. He asked if I was here alone. I remember not wanting to answer because all I could think about was the fact that there were 3 little girls asleep in the house. I decided instead of answering him, I would simply state there was no party here and that they needed to leave. The girl was adamant that she was there for the party. The guy who had asked me the question took a step forward, and I demanded this time they leave, and we all heard the sound of a foam button being pushed. I had forgotten it was even in my hand, but it seemed to be enough to startle the guy who thought I pushed it on purpose. The guy quickly told the other guy that they were leaving and helped the woman up. As soon as they were outside, I slammed the door and locked it and quickly ran up to the front window to watch them. They continued up the block, so it wasn't merely messing up the house numbers for them. The mum returned home 2 hours later and was confused why the door was locked. She was too drunk, so I told her it was just to make me feel safe. I feel stupid for not telling someone, but they didn't do it again. To the 3 drunks one winter's night, let's not meet again. I was 18 and decided to drop out of high school to go with my girlfriend to Central America. I had been having a fantastic time, except for one incident that was a bit uncomfortable with an older gentleman. I would say in general people were nicer and kinder to us than I could have ever have expected. Anyway, it was kind of the end of a long ride from a beach to Leon, and in order to be able to make it back to Granada, which is where we were going to stay that night, we were shuffled onto a bus where we really didn't know where we were going. Over the course of the bus ride, people began to filter off the bus. We didn't notice at first because it was over the course of a few stops and we were trying to rest a bit, but by the time we got into the city of Managua, there were just about 4 or 5 people on the bus, including us. The sun had gone down, the bus was driving into areas where literally every structure was half-built concrete and corrugated metal sheets, and the streets were getting narrower and narrower. We saw 3 dead dogs on the side of the road, which were being eaten by other dogs, and then we stopped looking out the windows. Eventually the bus stops, the driver quickly ushers us off the bus, and then locks the doors and drive away. We look around and it's the scene of a nightmare. I don't want to over-dramatize it, because in many ways it was the saddest and darkest part I've ever been to, but there's a lot of desperation there that I couldn't fully comprehend. It was like if you took everything terrifying a drug addict might meet in East Harlem at 5 a.m. on a Tuesday, every schizophrenic patient who's ever received treatment of any kind, and every young opportunistic criminal you've ever met, and left them to fend for a year. One woman who sticks out in my mind was standing on a pile of cinder blocks, licking a downed power line with her eyes rolled back in her head. We stood there for a good 3 minutes trying to say under our breaths to each other, "What are we going to do?" Every cab that drove by ignored traffic lights and wouldn't stop for us, and people started noticing. The true scariest moment was when people started coming out of their houses and just standing there staring directly at us. My girlfriend was on the verge of tears at this point, and finally this little old woman came running out of her house yelling at us, "What are you doing here?" in Spanish, and grabs us and pulls us into her friend's shop, shouting and shooing away the people who have crowded closest to us. She then tells us that if we have walked a block in any direction, we would have been robbed, beaten, or worse. She locked us into her shop until we could jump into a car that her friend had called that pulled up in front of the shop. Moral of the story, we nearly perished in Nicaragua. This happened last night and the night before. A little backstory first. I live in a not too safe area. The block I'm on is okay, but if you walk down my street a block or two, you get to a very sketchy area. When we leave the house, we head up a side street that gets us away from trouble. Like I said, my block isn't bad. We all get along here. Most people on this block are related to each other, all but for my household. But even though we are strangers to the neighbors, they're nice to us. The people right next door have dogs as well as a few other households. Again, we are the odd ones out of the departments as well. The dogs only bark when someone is on our block that doesn't live here. I've always felt safer because of the dogs. I live in a home converted into a duplex. When you walk in the front door, you are in the entryway, and then across the entryway you see my apartment door. Then if you go up the stairs beside my door, you will find the door to the second apartment. The front door to the house has no lock mechanism at all. It's so tenants cannot lock each other out of the house. We can only lock the doors of our apartments. So when you come into the entryway, a motion sensing light comes on. No one is currently living upstairs. So at this time it's just me and my husband living in the place. 2 nights ago my husband was in bed. I was up watching TV. I was all relaxed and thinking about going to bed. It was nearly 1 a.m. And suddenly I get this overwhelming, uncomfortable feeling. I feel hot and sick in my stomach, and I had the intrusive thought that I needed to go check the apartment door to make sure it was locked. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't. So I resort to getting up to look. Just as I got there, I heard someone open the screen door on the outer house door. I looked and the door was locked. Then I heard the actual door to the house open and someone step into the entryway. I was terrified. I know no one who lives upstairs, and my landlord said he would let me know if someone was moving. We don't get visitors this late or without a phone call first, and also with this pandemic and social distancing, no one should be coming over anyway. Then I heard a click. I recognized the click as the sound of the motion lights. It's turned on. Then I hear a male voice go, "Aw, crap," and the sound of someone running out the house. I was terrified and stood there trying to process what happened. From the time I heard the screen door until a solid minute after the person ran out, I stood there frozen. The neighborhood dogs were barking their heads off all night, and they only do that if someone they don't know is around. I think that someone who didn't know that the house is a duplex attempted to let themselves in. The light, which is way too bright for that tiny entryway, came on and scared them away. I woke up my husband and called the police, and they said that since the person was not trying to get into my apartment exactly, they weren't coming out. The best they could do was super comforting, which was drive by the apartment a few times. Great. Last night, I was up late again. The dogs were barking like crazy. At a little after midnight, I heard a noise. I mute the TV and realize someone is pounding on the outer house door. Not my apartment door, thank goodness. I was freaked out. I wanted to go in and wake up the husband, but thought better of it. There's a window beside the outer house door where he was knocking, and that window is our bedroom window. Because my husband was asleep and the lights were on in the living room, but off in the bedroom, I thought if I opened the door, the person standing out on the porch hammering on the door would see the light, and therefore know someone was there. And I was afraid to let whoever was out there know I was home. I sat here for over 10 minutes of banging. It was not stopping. I thought maybe it was the police because of the call I made the night before, so I called the police and told them what was happening, and asked if it could be police at my door. He looked into it and said that whoever it wasn't the police, as well as not to open the door. He said he was sending police out, and if someone was still banging on the door, they would walk to them, and he said he would call when he knew what was going on. The banging stopped about 5 minutes after hanging up with the police dispatcher, but I never got a phone call, so I don't know if the police did ever show. Tonight the dogs were already barking, and I've been barking for the past hour. My husband decided that I'm going to bed early, and he's staying up. I doubt I'll sleep anyway. I made him promise that no matter what, if he hears something, not to unlock our front door. If there are any more shenanigans tonight, well, I don't even want to know. When I was in grade 11, and I had just moved to a new town, I quickly became attracted to this one girl, and I would have given up my left nut for a date. We got paired up to be partners in our food and fabrics class, and I totally pulled out all the stops. I was doing whatever it took to get a date with this girl. In the class, there were a couple of projects where you'd have to sew a pillowcase or a pair of pajamas. My family didn't have a sewing machine, so we would do the project at her house. Upon the visits, I began to question how badly I wanted this girl. She lived in what appeared to be a wood cabin, and her father seemed legitimately insane. The walls were lined with animal skulls. The guy was a hardcore hunter. He had bearskin rugs and antlers all over the place. He would always walk around with his shirt off, drinking a Budweiser, chewing tobacco, and carrying a firearm, and never spoke a word to me. By this time, I was starting to gain some friendship in the school, and one of the guys I met, Neil, noticed I had taken a liking to her. He then asked me if I had heard about her parents. He proceeded to tell me that her dad ended the life of her mother and got away with it. Her body was found in the middle of the town, pumped with a couple of rounds from a shotgun. He got off on the charges from lack of proof, and she had to live with him because he was her last living relative. At this point I was like, what? The story made no sense and I wasn't about to believe it, but it definitely rattled me. But there was no way I was going to bring it up with her. A little time passes and I ask around. I go to her place to grab her and she's gorgeous. Her dad makes a comment about, you know what'll happen to you if you touch her. And suddenly the story is the only thing I can think about. We went skating, then to a movie, but I was terrified the whole time. I just couldn't get the thought out of my head that her dad was going to end my life when I got back to her place. So after a subpar date, I started the long drive back to her house. We get to the end of her driveway, which is long as she had an acreage, and she gets to the park and turns off the lights. She wants a kiss. At this point, forget her dad, I lean over and kiss her. We stop, I turn the lights back on, and there's blood in the snow and at the end of the driveway. I wanted to say something, but I didn't want to sound like a coward. Her dad was a hunter, right? I'm sure there's a logical explanation. I put the car in drive and start winding down the driveway. The trail of blood seems to be getting thicker, and I'm more freaked out. She still says nothing as she's fixing her hair in the mirror. I keep driving, more blood. I turn the last corner of her driveway and see my headlights shift from the trees to her father, standing in the middle of the driveway, covered in blood, blood all around him, huge weapon in hand, and what appeared to be a naked human body lying at his feet. I'm hyperventilating. Suddenly I'm crying and I don't know why, and I piss my pants. Her dad takes me to the hospital. Turns out I have had mild asthma for my entire life and had a panic attack. The dad found a bear at the end of the driveway, shot it, dragged it down the driveway and skinned it, or at least the part that I saw, before we got back. That was a little over 3 years ago, and I'm still with the girl. Her dad calls me a coward all the time, except we've gone on hunting trips together, and I'm pretty sure he's a fan. Neil was a jealous ex. Her parents split up, and her mum is actually pretty awesome too. A couple of years ago, I babysat for a family friend. She and her husband lived with their 2 kids, a girl of about 7, Kay, and a boy about 12 called Jay. I babysat these kids so much that we became very close, brother and sister type deal. They weren't difficult kids. They had a hard home life because their parents were borderline abusive, but they were still good. I tried my best to be a positive adult, as I was around 19 during this time. The family moved around a lot. I've known them for over 6 years, and they've moved nearly every year. This happened in 2015. I was halfway through my senior year when the family moved into the house. It was nice, just built in 2013 or something. A nice neighborhood, but rent was really low. The mother often bragged about the steal that she got from the house. To put it into perspective, the average rent in this area is about $1,200 for an apartment. These guys got a whole 2-story house, 3 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, freshly built in a nice neighborhood for $650. I thought that was weird and asked if there was anything wrong with the house, to which she replied the inspection came back clear, and I didn't think much beyond that. I started babysitting, and I immediately felt something was off. I have anxiety, so going to new places really puts me in a funk, so I just figured that it was that at first. The way the home is set out is important. On the bottom floor they had a living room, dining area and a kitchen with some other rooms. I spent most of my time in the living room working on things for school while the kids were upstairs playing games or with their friends. While you're in the living room, there's a wall that blocks you from seeing the stairs. Upstairs there are bedrooms. Immediately off the stairs, above the living room is the parents' room, which was off limits to the kids. Then a loft area that looks down over the front door to make a grand foyer feeling. There's a light that can be on, which can be seen from the downstairs because of the loft. Then the kids' bedrooms were down the hallway. Now let's get into the experiences. Nothing happened really at first that was too mind-boggling. Little noises here and there, knocks on the walls, things being misplaced, lights flickering, but nothing that really made me think ghosts. I figured they got what they paid for, and my memory was garbage. After a few months of that, things started picking up. The kids, who were usually very sweet and kind to each other, started becoming noticeably more snappy to everyone, especially Jay. He had complained about nightmares he started having, about someone standing in his doorway watching him. His parents wouldn't listen though. Their behavior grew even worse as time went on. It was a weekend, and the parents were going to be gone for a while. The kids were upstairs doing their thing, and I was downstairs in the living room looking at pizza to order for lunch. Out of nowhere I hear a really loud footstep coming from above me in the parents' bedroom, thunderous even. Thinking it was the kids being little dingus meats, I immediately headed upstairs to tell them to get out. But I was greeted with the 2 kids standing in the doorway, staring at the closed door to their parents' bedroom, the footsteps and bangs still continuing inside. At this point, I thought it was an intruder and instructed the kids to get in their rooms and lock the door. I called 911 and explained the situation. As I stayed on the phone, the footsteps continued to walk around the room. I could hear it move to different locations of the room. 2 officers arrived, so I grabbed the kids and we waited outside. The banging still continued as one of the officers escorted us out. They came out empty-handed and said nothing was there, and that it may have been something with the door because the banging stopped as soon as they'd opened it. I'd felt the shaking of the floor move around the room, so I knew it wasn't the door. But I guess in my denial, I ignored it and took the kids out for ice cream, trying not to think about it. Another time, the kids and I were sitting in the dining area eating dinner. It was only us 3 in the house, and from the dining area you could see the light upstairs was on, and it cast a shadow onto the front door. I was making a joke about how I'm the only one who knows how to turn a light off around here, and saw a shadow of a hand from upstairs on the front door. And I think that's when it really got to me that the house was haunted. The kids didn't see it, and I didn't tell them. I figured it would just add stress that they didn't need. I told the parents that night when they came home, but they brushed me off, saying that they haven't experienced anything. This continued on for a while. I would experience something, the kids would, but the parents wouldn't believe any of us. It was summer, just after I graduated high school. I remember it vividly, because I was awake reading articles about a huge shooting that happened in my town. That's when the banging from upstairs started again. I was used to it at this point, but what I was not used to was the banging footsteps coming down the stairs. These steps were methodical and menacing. I felt terrible energy in the room, and it was cold despite it being the middle of the summer in the south. I counted the seconds between the steps. It was 5. Every single time. I called out to the kids and told them to stop joking around, but I knew it wasn't the kids, and I was terrified. The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs, and I couldn't see who was there. Then I saw an apparition. It was of a little girl. She had brunette hair and a red dress, and looked innocent enough, but the energy in the room was so heavy I almost threw up. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and she didn't move. I figured I was hallucinating, so I began rubbing my eyes, but when I finished rubbing them, she was right in front of me. In that situation, I couldn't move or do anything. My mind just went to kid brain, and I hid under the blanket. I called the parents, crying, and told them to come back immediately. When they came, the energy in the room lightened, and I finally came out from under the blanket, and she was gone. They asked me what was wrong and what happened, and I told them that it didn't matter because they wouldn't believe me. I then informed them to find another babysitter because I would not be returning. I still wonder about those kids. I hope they ended up okay. They moved out of that house at the end of the year, but I'm not sure if what I saw was attached to them or not. I'm still not sure what I saw. I live with my mum in a house that we bought 1.5 years ago, but only moved in 6 months ago because all of the renovations that needed to be done to it were quite demanding. Often when it was in the reno stage, I would go over there at night and hang out, and almost every time I was there, I would hear these creepy creaky noises. They freaked me out, especially since the renovations included adding a whole wing to the house, which made it very easy for unwanted guests to enter. However, I know that houses make sounds, so I tried to forget about it. One late night during the reno phase, I went over to the second house and punched in the garage code. You can hear the garage open from pretty much anywhere in the house if you're not making too much noise. As the garage began to open, I heard loud sounds like pots and pans being banged together, although we didn't have any in the house at the time. To be honest, I was terrified, just standing there trying to decide what I was hearing and what I should do about it. Ultimately, I decided to close the garage and go back home. I've not heard anything like this before or since. After this, I only went to the house if I had someone with me, and a few months later my mum moved in. Fast forward to present day. The creepy house noises that I heard in the reno phase have been diminished, but I still hear them almost exclusively at night, as I regularly stay up late. They sound like someone's accidentally knocking their elbow against the door. Nothing to be too concerned about, but I always sleep with my fan on because I sleep in late, and the white noise blocks out any potential sounds that might scare me. Last night I wanted to conserve energy, so I didn't turn it on. I was laying in bed, lights off, when I heard what sounds like my basement door closing. It was 5 a.m, so definitely not my mum. I continued to hear what sounds like shuffling noises coming down the hall towards my room. My mum's bedroom is on the other side of the house, so she wouldn't hear this. I dialed 911, but didn't press call trying to rationalize. After a few minutes of hearing nothing, I turned on my fan but kept my phone turned on the phone app. 911, still dialed. Eventually I went to sleep. I have foster kittens that sleep in a dog crate near my mum's room. This morning one of them was acting peculiar, very scared, hiding, and hissing whenever I went near him. I've had him for a week, and he's only exhibited his behavior in the first day. And he was fine when I put him to bed last night. His brother is a lot more laid back than him, and I haven't noticed a change in his behavior. I'm not entirely sure I would, since he's better with strangers. Tonight I'm going to put tape on the attic and basement doors, and I sincerely hope they're there when I wake up tomorrow. I haven't told my mum my concerns because I have a history of drug abuse. Although I'm sober now, and although I've never had any hallucinations or delusions, she jumps to conclusions. I just went to the room that's adjacent to the room with the attic to grab my charger, and swore I heard something move. I had my kittens in both hands, so I put them in the crate and grabbed a weapon and went back, but I heard nothing, and I was too scared to do anything, but I'm in the other room and keep hearing sounds. The next morning, I spent half the night in the room besides the hallway which contains the attic and basement door, listening, weapons at the ready. At around 1 a.m., I heard what I thought was unmistakably someone moving around in the other room. I dialed 911 but didn't call, scooped up my kittens and weapon and knocked on my mum's bedroom door. This woke up my dog, who has a bad sense of sight and smell, startles very easily, and that's why I don't rely on him, who started to bark very loudly. I told my mum I thought someone was in the house. She walked the dog around our house perimeter while I cleared the rooms in the hallway except the basement and attic, but nothing. I got the step ladder and climbed to the attic after my mum definitely confirmed it was empty of humans. We then checked the basement. It's an unfurnished crawl space that leads to a door on our porch. We didn't check the crawl space. I put tape on the basement door, but I stayed up all night in the living room with the lights and TV on loud so the hypothetical person wouldn't think I'm sleeping and sneak around. I have my brother and father coming over tomorrow, so I'm just going to get them help me out with things. Just so you know, I live in a smaller town, so there's no non-emergency number I can call. I'm almost convinced it could just be animals, but I'm going to put flour on the basement stairs as well. The tape on the door was undisturbed, but I've heard those sounds. Having someone live in your house is so uncommon, but as I mentioned, my mind tends to jump to the worst conclusion when you don't have a lot of evidence. My wife and I were out for the night. We've had the same babysitter taking care of our twin boys for a while now. One of the boys was having issues falling asleep, teething and night terrors. Around 9 p.m. we got a text from her, and my wife and I were super creeped out. We drove home quickly, and I checked the house and I didn't find anything, but the babysitter was eager to leave. I've never seen a person's face more pale since that day. Here's the babysitter's text from that night. Hey, so I just had something really weird happen. No problems or anything, just strange. When I turned on the baby monitor, link was up, so I was pretty much playing a game of back and forth of picking him up and rocking him and putting him back to bed. Finally, after I put him back in bed for the third time, I didn't hear anything for about 5 minutes. I looked into the baby monitor, and there was a person or something bending over the crib. It looked like me bending over the crib, so I assumed the baby monitor glitched from when I was tucking him in. Then I realized I was not wearing a blue shirt or black pants. I took a picture of the screen as well, and there seemed to be a cloudiness to the video as the sound cut out. If you look at it, it almost looks like somebody's in the crib with him, cradling him, almost calming him. I thought it was one of you guys that had come home early and heard him crying, so you went to comfort him yourself. But when I went upstairs, there was no one there. I honestly didn't know what to make of that. During my life, I've had a number of strange experiences happen to me. The first, I was in bed sleeping, when I had a dream that I woke up in my bed. It's a loft bed about 6'5" feet up, and I saw a very tall figure of a man standing at the foot of my bed. He had long, sharp fingers and an arm that reached close to his knees. He was about 12 feet in height and had to hunch over his head or it would hit the ceiling, and he scared the hell out of me. He reached for my leg and grabbed it with his sharp fingers and tried to pull me from the bed, but I held onto the rails of the bed and he was too weak to pull me free. His claw-like fingers raked down my calf as I woke up. Immediately I sat up and realized my leg had a long scratch going down from just below the knee to my ankle, and it was bleeding. The second is my old house had a staircase with a window at foot level that overlooked the driveway. As I walked up the stairs, I'd sometimes see a large, bulky black dog looking at me, sitting from the outside window from the corner of my eye. It had glowing yellow-orange eyes, but would be gone if I looked directly at it. I also saw it in the laundry room of the house, but it again vanished when I looked directly at it. I saw it 7 or 8 different times, all by the stairs except for one time in the laundry room. I never told a soul, but this year 2 of my brothers told me that they had seen the dog by the stairs as well. We had 3 dogs at that house who had free reign of the property, but none of them looked remotely like the beast we saw. I'm confident it was not a real dog, because the real dogs who lived there chased any and every animal away religiously. If it's relevant, both the laundry room and the stairs were added to the house after my family moved in. The third occasion. After staying a night at my friend's house, I woke up to see a silver orb about the size of a softball rolling around on the ceiling. It rolled a bit, then rolled right into the ceiling, and I never saw it again. I later read about something called the Bird's Mystery Sphere, which resembles what I saw, but was larger than the one I saw. My next event happened when I was 19. This one starts with a very special and occasional phenomenon that happens while I was in college. While laying down for bed, I feel the presence of someone laying behind me or above me. When I slept on my back or side, following the weird feeling, I'd hear a woman or young girl's voice whisper something in my ear. It was typically either my name or something along the lines of, "Don't sleep, wake up, stay here." Then I'd get this feeling like a gentle touch or something cold touch my back that would make me jump. After time passed, the incidents increased in frequency. After a semester at school, which I didn't like, I took a semester off and moved back home. During my time, this would happen every other week or so, and the "wake up, don't sleep" message did not change. But things really picked up when I went to a different school the following semester. I've had these whispers in my ear and the weird feeling of someone behind me almost nightly. After about 2 weeks of this, the voice changed from a woman or girl to an old man. He spoke a language I didn't understand and was intensely creepy. I also got a very strong feeling of evil when it happened. He never spoke to me in more than 2 or 3 words. Then I began to get sleep paralysis when I slept on my back, which I did to avoid the creepy voice. My 2 sleep paralysis episodes featured a large demonic creature breathing heavily and running towards my bed, and the sound of hurt animals as well. At this point I was too freaked out and consulted Reddit and was advised to try and tell the voices to go away. That same night I felt the presence behind me and told it loudly to go away before it spoke. It did not speak, but the room felt lighter. So I settled back in and felt the presence again a few minutes after, followed by a very intense sensation similar to an ice cube being pressed against my back. I told it to go away again, and the ice cube sensation then happened 3 times in rapid succession, so I sat up loudly and told it to piss off, and the presence seemed to disappear. As I laid back down to try to sleep, I felt the bed tilt towards the wall, and felt as though I was going to be dumped onto the floor head first. I bolt upright, and the bed is still lying flat. I look towards the center of the room, and see a very large purple disc with some green on it, floating from near the door towards the sliding glass door to the balcony of the apartment. It was hard to describe, shaped like a rounded disc about 4 feet thick and about 6 to 7 feet in diameter. It wasn't glowing. It almost looked like it was made of colored shadow. But it was not transparent, and floated towards the balcony straight through the glass door. I was in awe but not afraid. After it left, the room felt lighter and safer. I have not had a single strange experience since then, and this happened in late September of 2018. This story took place when I was around 4 or 5. I was born and raised in an extremely close and big family. We all lived within about a mile from each other, around a large peak in a small Texas town. Unrelated fun fact for those horror fans out there, this peak is the present-day location of the majority of the town of the dreaded sundown murders. My family was jam-packed full of aunts, uncles, and I'd say I saw them at least once a week for my entire childhood. I can't stress enough how close we all were growing up, and how trusting they all were, as it plays an important part on the story. So this story came up recently between my older brother, my mother and I, because I opened up about a series of nightmares I'd been having that have basically plagued me for as long as I can remember. These nightmares are always very similar, and basically always consist of me as a small child in my childhood home, attempting to escape my home while something horrible chases after me. The something is never actually visually seen, but is more like this massive, looming person reaching out to me from the dark, and it always catches me before I can get outside. This usually results in me waking up in sweat. These dreams always seem to center around these very vague, yet oddly detailed memories of a babysitter I once had. Here's where it gets odd. These memories I have are almost like dreams. I very specifically remember the details of what was happening and the feelings I had during these events. But everything else was just out of reach. That goes for the babysitter herself as well. I remember it was a female who was middle-aged, but can't for the life of me recall her face. In my memories, it looks like I never got a good look at her. The 2 specific incidences I remember were not happy ones. The first memory I have is that when I would get in trouble, what for I have no memory of, I would be forced to sit outside on the back porch in shorts and a t-shirt during winter. I remember because I would shiver and just sit there quietly, scared, and complaining would only cause the babysitter to give me more problems. The second memory was even worse to me. The babysitter loved to play this game she made up. She would turn off all the lights in the house and go hide deep in one of the back rooms. I was left in the front room and was told that if I wanted food or to watch TV, I had to find her first. I never had any idea where she was hiding, and if I ever found her, she would jump out screaming like a madwoman and chase me. I remember her laughter and my fear. I often remember being frozen with terror that I would sit on the ground near the front door too scared to find her. No matter how long I waited, she would never come out of hiding, regardless of how hungry I got. I specifically remember this one time very well. I was so little and scared. I was whimpering as I slowly built up bravery to walk to the back hall looking for her. My hunger felt deadly at this point, and I needed to find her. I checked bathrooms, bedroom, and closets, and nothing. She was nowhere. I remember standing in my parents' bedroom trying to figure out where she could be when I saw her. She was a dark shape under the big bed peeking at me from under the bedskirt. We stared at each other unmoving. I couldn't make out her face, but I knew she was smiling at me. She was like a crazy feral animal under there. I remember her sliding herself along the floor so fast, screaming and turning to run as she made it to her feet. And then the memory goes dark. I don't know what happened after that, and that scares me just as much as the memory I do have of the event. I never shared these memories because they seemed so distant I often wondered if they were even real. One day when I was in my 20s, I mentioned the nightmares to my mother and brother while we were sitting around talking one of the weeks when my brother and I were home from college. We would often do this to tell funny stories and remember all the kids we knew from long before. Then I decided to ask my mum about the babysitter. She seemed confused and told me she'd never hired a babysitter for either I or my brother because of how big and close my family was and how protective my mum was of us. She never trusted anyone but family to watch us. My aunts and grandmother were the absolute opposite of the woman. Loving, kind, fun, and treated me like their own children. I couldn't imagine them doing these things to me. My mum seemed genuinely confused but also slightly worried, like a mother would be while hearing such a horrible story. She told me she truly couldn't even begin to imagine who I was talking about. With her certainty, and with the memories being so vague in important places, I decided I must have imagined it. Then my brother brought it up again the next day when we were driving together. "Yeah, I remember that," he said with some concern in his voice. "Like I remember seeing you getting taken outside and being forced to sit there, and I thought it was horrible. I don't know why we never told anyone." He too had no memory of who the woman was, but he remembers feeling defenseless over the whole thing. He only had vague memories of the horrible games she would play, but pointed out how he absolutely had no memory of her ever targeting him with her torment. He remembers the events as if he were an audience member. He did, however, remember things I didn't. That included that I would often get into trouble because I would use my imagination to tell stories, and the babysitter would often get mad and she realized it wasn't true. This resulted in me being kicked out of the house. I just wanted to point out to my brother that he was only 1 year older, so he too was very little. I have thought about bringing it back up with my mum, but I honestly trust her that she has no idea who I'm talking about, and I don't want to make her feel horrible about something that happened so long ago. I just wish I could understand what the hell happened and who the hell she was. My brother never brought it up again after that, but told me at the time he had always played off the memory as being young and misunderstanding whatever happens. I once saw a guy light himself and then jump off an 8-story building. The aftermath is something that I would much rather forget. As you can imagine, it's quite horrifying. When I saw something pinkish roll towards me, I assumed it was a stray basketball. But as you can imagine, it was something else entirely. Like I said before, this is an event I would rather forget, and it was one of the most disturbing things in my life. To this day, I now stay away from fire and am supremely afraid of heights.